All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for finding the lecture despite my best efforts to prevent you from being here. Changed the dates, did not advertise it, and didn't let anybody know it's not in the newspaper, so great. I don't know how you got here. So that's pretty good. That's a compliment to people to actually be able to find this. This evening's lecture is on the Axial Age, the Zeit. A concept that was originally promulgated by the philosopher Karl Jaspers. And if you've been paying particularly close attention to this series called The Ancients, Lao Tzu, the Buddha, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Zarathustra, and many other philosophers who are, if you can look on the back page here, it'll give you the list. Democritus, Dionysius, Euclid, Epicurus, Aeschylus, Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Pythagoras, Themistocles, Confucius, Mahavira, Lao Tzu, all lived within a very short historical window, about 300 years, depending on how you do the dates. You can even narrow it more and make it 200 years if you want, or you can expand it a little to include a few other philosophers, make it 400 years. But somewhere between 200 and 300 years, an incredible list of some of the most influential philosophers in history lived. And this got Jaspers thinking. He's like, well, why is this? If you look from the period 100 or 200 to 1000, you don't get a list of like this. It's not that there's nobody that's there. Of course, Muhammad is there. Significant. If you look further back in the past, of course, for various reasons we'll talk about, you don't get anything, or very little. And so there's just this remarkable period. And it's all over the world. Notice these are not directly connected. Thinkers who are creating the kind of philosophical, intellectual systems that influence us till today. Now, there's no reason this should be so. And yet, there it is. A couple of thousand years later, we're still influenced all over the world by the thinkers that I've talked about in this series, who were all born and lived in just a few generations. Very strange thing. Very odd. And so, again, Jaspers named this the Axial Age, and this launched sort of, if you do research on this, there's a lot of debate and people talking about this, but it's not really that complicated. It's that simple. It's like, look, why and would all of these thinkers, and why would their influence carry for so long? And as a conclusion to what we've talked about for this year's series, The Ancient Thinkers, and as an introduction to what we're going to do next year, what I'm going to do next year, I want to look at why this is probably so, and where it leads us to today, and then what that means for the future. So to understand this, it's important to note what's happened, the transitions that we've been through. The first, and some argue the most important transition in human history, was from primarily hunter-gathering groups, small communities, sometimes mobile, sometimes fixed, lots of fishing villages, lots of river living, some migratory groups, to sedentary agriculture. This is a total and complete radical change of the way people lived. Basically, everything changes. It doesn't happen all at once, of course. But by the time your society has adopted a sedentary agriculture, pretty much your whole system has changed. Because the way land is used, ownership issues, the food that you eat, family relationships, tribal relationships, everything has to change. You can see the echoes of this transition in things like the story of the Garden of Eden. We used to just live in balance with nature. We didn't have to work. The fruit fell from the trees. And then we got kicked out. And now we have to work our asses off, and that's no good. Or in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh is this, sort of bad guy. And they're like, what do we do to make him be better? Well, let's get him a friend. And the friend they get him, Enkidu, is living with the wild animals. He is the untamed human. And so that, again, you get that story of that transition from being wild, uncivilized, tribal, powerful, and then making the transition so that he can be a friend with Gilgamesh. This is also there again. So this is the first huge transition. And so that takes place, pick your date, starting about 10,000 years ago, give or take 1,000 years, and rolling along merrily till about 3,000 years ago. Again, give or take. At some point, right around 5 to 3,000 years ago, or 5 to 3,000 years BC, actually, you get a couple of things happen. One, you get the Bronze Age kicking off. And the Bronze Age has some important influences. One, if you have bronze and the other people have stone spears, sharpened sticks, and rocks, you win. Ha-ha. So bronze is good. Plus, bronze is beautiful. So not only can you kill people effectively, you look good doing it. Now this seems crazy, but you have to remember that in the ancient world, what a leader is responsible for is security and looking good and making you look good. So jewelry, emblazoned goods of all kinds, and you have to imagine that you're going out to battle and you have a sharpened stick with a nice stone on it. These are very efficient, by the way. These are not, rudiment elements. They're very dangerous. And then across the way, you see somebody in just glowing bronze armor, shining in the sun, with a sword or a long spear with a big bronze tip on it. This is intimidating as hell. One, it's hard to pierce the bronze armor, but two, it just looks so intimidating. And so trade goods, power goods, status goods, bronze. You got to have it. And so all these networks of trade start to expand because you need copper and you need tin. And generally copper and tin don't occur at the same place at the same time. And so you're trading huge networks to get the tin and the copper together so you can make quality bronze. Sometimes then you add lead, even better bronze. Now you're in business. And so if you read the Iliad, part of the Iliad is a Bronze Age story. And then it's a memory of a Bronze Age that fails, that collapses, it goes away. But a lot of that story is set in a Bronze Age culture. But those transitions had incredible meaning. Part of that meaning is the growth of cities. So not only this trade is going on, but cities, as agriculture gets better, start to grow. The other story you get in the Epic of Gilgamesh is the beginning of this transition from small-scale agriculture, say 10,000 people in a city, or 15,000, which is a huge city in the ancient world, by the way. All of a sudden you start getting more, and your leader needs to be not just a thug, right? The leader used to be the guy who could enforce things the most. And if you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, the great story there, the problem he has is he just goes around killing everybody and stealing all the women. And people go, that's not a very good leader. And they pray to the gods and they say, we've got to do something. This is not the kind of leader we need now. Because now the cities are growing. We need new systems. And basically that growth continues until you get to what we call about the Axial Age. Now it occurs at slightly different locations, at slightly different times, but it's a whole series of problems that comes together. As your cities slowly grow, as your agriculture gets slightly more efficient and can support a larger number of people who aren't working in agriculture, as your trade networks expand, as you gain literacy, you have a group of people, scribes at first, then more people who are literate and can write, you get all kinds of new problems. So first, just think cities. We're used to cities. But again, in the ancient world, 95 to 99% of the population were peasants, serfs, or slaves. They just don't matter in history, in philosophy. Nobody talks about them, basically. They're just there. Maybe you slaughter them once in a while because why not? But basically, they're just this low-level background. And so when you originally, early on, move into the small cities, you just have basically a big guy who enforces everything with a priesthood. Life is good. No problems. Simple, very hierarchical. And then slowly, as your city gets bigger, you have to diversify. Oh, we want to plant. This is Babylonians. Why did the Babylonians create a lot of math? They had a lot of mathematical problems. They had all this land they needed to plant. And so they needed, how much grain do you need to plant an area of this size? Okay, you need an equation for that. Oh, so now you've got priests, scribe, mathematicians developing. And you can't live without them. Literally, if those people aren't around being trained up to do the math necessary, you just starve to death. And notoriously, the rivers flood in the ancient world, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, and this wipes out all of your property boundaries. So now you've got to figure out where the fields are again, and then you have to figure out the area of the fields again. And this is really, it's actually very challenging quadratic equations, right? This is serious mathematics they have to figure out how to do. The more your cities grow, the more these problems ramify. The other thing that you run into is merchants. The ancient world had no idea what to do with merchants. Confucius had no use for them. Aristotle says if you have to have a port in your ideal city, put it far away. The Spartans, Lacedaemonians, they would not allow it, essentially. They didn't allow merchants as little as they could possibly have contact with them. Because here's what happens with merchants. They sail into your harbor. One, they probably speak a slightly different language. They're barbarians. That's off-putting. Two, they have weird stuff. And historically speaking, people get excited when they see weird stuff. They go, ooh. And this disrupts your society to a phenomenal degree. It's very disruptive of social cohesion. We live in the sort of, absolute infinite effect of that, where the status of stuff is so huge. But all of a sudden stuff, you don't even know where this material goods come from. It shows up in your harbor one day, and people start freaking out. They're like, oh, we want some of that. So almost every ancient society, again, if you read Plato, if you read Socrates, if you read Confucius, if you read the Buddha, good Lord, talk about, hey, don't pay any attention to that material stuff. Keep it away. The leaders need not to be influenced. They don't want to see outside goods. But not just outside goods. The other thing merchants do is go, well, that's interesting. In my country, the women own all the property. And people go, shut the hell up. Do not repeat that. Just you be quiet. That's because it disrupts. I mean, we always think of the China closing off, with Japan closing off, which happened in relatively recent history. But this concept of, hey, let's shut out the outside. Things are going great. Everything is calm. Let's keep it that way by closing off the outside world. This comes up repeatedly. But the first time you really see it is in the Axial Age. Because this is when trade networks are really becoming so vast and so complicated and so important that it starts disrupting things. Your citizens start traveling. If you ever read great Herodotus history. See, Herodotus' history is weird because they always say, oh, it's the history of the Persian Wars. It's not. It's a travel log. He just wanders about in that and just says, oh, well, over here, the people, they eat the people. They don't bury them. When you live to a certain age, they just have a party and they eat you, and that's great. This is true. I'm not making that up. It's in Herodotus. Or these people leave the dead out to be eaten by crows. It would be the Zoroastrians, of course. Or these, all these different burial ceremonies, all these different ways of treating slaves, all these different ways of treating women, all these different things they do with money. And then the people come back. And they go, hey, things don't have to be this way. They could be different. Oh, that's a problem. This is a real problem in the ancient world. It disrupts, it's culturally disruptive. Because I'm in charge, or the oligarchy is in charge, whoever's in charge does not want to hear things can be different. They want to hear that this is how it must be for all time going forward, and that's how it's been for all time in the past. And don't disturb that. And then you start getting money. Oh, the funniest passages in Aristotle is when he tries to write about money. Because A, he has no idea what he's talking about, and B, he hates it. And again, this is money just totally upset the ancient world. Because they're like, you take seed, you plant it, you grow grain. Excellent. You take money, you loan it out at interest, it makes more money? That can't possibly be, because it's not alive. So we're going to make that illegal because it freaks us out. And yet, of course, everybody did this because loaning money at interest is such a great idea that everybody recognizes immediately that this is what you want to do. We forget that the democratic revolution in ancient Athens was set off because people kept selling themselves into slavery. They used themselves as security for loans, which they tended to then speculate with in the markets. Does this sound familiar? See, it's nothing new under the sun, you know? And so they're like, wow, this is bad. Don't sell yourself into slavery. We've got to do something. And of course, the people who had the money were cornering the market, and so everybody was becoming a slave except for a few people who were becoming incredibly, fabulously wealthy by loaning money, which just doesn't make sense. Did not make sense to them. So all that Confucius writes about this, they all write about it. What do you do about money? What do you do about all these weird material goods that are coming into our society? What do you do about money that's coming in? We didn't have this problem before. How do you distribute it? Do you tax it? Do you just keep people from having it? And Plato says that in the Republic that the people who are going to rule, the philosopher king, should basically never touch it. It's best if they pretty much didn't know it existed. Which is crazy if you're Athenian and you live on trade, which is sort of, Plato was not in keeping with the tenor of his city-state. He was very critical of it, and one thing he did not like was all these trade and merchants and money stuff going on. So they passed all over the ancient world during the Axial Age, they passed all these sumptuary laws to restrict when you could buy, what you could buy, how much you could buy, what you could charge. They're always trying to control this because, again, they felt it was disruptive. So you've got trade networks going crazy, you have the scale of the city increasing, you have money coming into prominence, and then you have writing. So again, something that we take for granted, but literacy is brand new. If you were literate in the ancient world, essentially you were an important, powerful person. Because nobody else could sit around for years and years acquiring the specialty necessary to be able to read and write. Particularly when you're looking at ancient languages, which tend to be what are called scribal languages. So if you're a scribe, your best interests are served by having the most complex possible language. Because this makes it really hard for other people to learn it. This is called employment. Right? You don't want just anybody learning the scribal language. You want to control the scribal language. It didn't take the scribes but about 12 minutes to figure that out. And also the language was written for people who were phenomenally literate. And so if you spend your entire life doing nothing but essentially being literate, you want complexity because it's interesting. You don't want simplicity because that's boring. You want fascinating, subtle, hugely complicated, incredibly expressive possibilities. And so scribal languages tended to be hugely difficult to learn. But the population, as you need to do record keeping, bureaucracy, is invented immediately as you get a city. A guy with a clipboard apparently shows up with a form that you have to fill out that makes no sense. They had the cuneiform tablets, bunch of forms that make no sense, right? Really, they had them first moment. But slowly that evolves into literacy and literature. Poems, songs, stories, myths, legends, all get written down. And eventually philosophy. People start thinking about all this stuff. And what's important is when you reach a critical mass, those texts can survive. All of the philosophy that we have may have been thought of 100 times over 1,000 years earlier, as far as we know. But if you don't have the writing, and you don't have writing that can survive, and a method of handing it on, then it vanishes to history. So part of the Axial Age may simply be a coincidence of the development of writing and the capacity to maintain writing. And this has been different in different places. Again, we have the Babylonians from so long ago because clay tablets, if you bury them in the desert, last a long, long time. Papyrus tablets, if you bury them in the desert, don't last for a week. So we have a lot less from the Egyptians' earliest period than we do from the Babylonians, just because of what they wrote on. So, part of this is just that technological development. Oral traditions work for a long time, but if they're never written down, they tend to get lost. And so what we have are those philosophical literary traditions that survived. But that requires a critical mass of literate people, which requires a city of a certain scale. And so one of the things that's happening in the Axial Age is this development. Again, the cities get sufficiently big that writing has enough density to be shared and passed around. So that's the inheritance part of writing. The other part of writing is, not sure why exactly, but it tends to change people's thinking. If you're literate and you're writing things down, it tends to change the way you think about the world. This is pretty clear. And Plato, in the Platonic dialogues of Socrates, particularly the Phaedrus, Socrates says you should not write things down. It ruins your mind. It destroys the way you think about the world. Because what happens is people start thinking what's been written down is true. What a strange thing. You start believing what's been written, and Socrates thought that was a threat. And he says the problem with what's written down is you can't question it. If somebody says something you're not sure about, Socrates says, you can say, hey, I'm not sure about that. Which is basically all Socrates did his entire life. To say, hey, I'm not sure about that. But if you write it down and people believe it, well, you can't question it. Socrates saw this very clearly, this threat of the texts that become unquestionable. He thought this was dangerous. He's probably correct. But it started to shape things. So this literacy takes on a life of its own. It becomes a power in its own right. And challenges all kinds of assumptions. Just to give you an example, this is very recent. When the Romans invaded the British Isles, they're a literate culture encountering a pre-literate culture. And the old tradition was, if you go to court, people swore. It was a communal justice. You got witnesses, and they all said, look, this is the way it is. Or if you're going to make an agreement, you got 5 people together and said, I made this agreement with him? Yes, we all agree? Yes, great. We've got our witnesses? Great. Anything goes wrong, you bring those people together. And then when the Romans showed up with paper, they're like, paper? Paper is not going to draw a sword and kill anybody if there's a disagreement. What good is it? Well, it turns out eventually, yeah. That paper wins. I'm not sure why. Somehow magically, paper always wins, right? It's how the Native Americans lost their land. It's sort of like, you don't have the right paper. Do we need paper? Oh, you're going to need paper. Yep. You need the right forms to be filed, or else we get to take your land. Yay! Right? It's that literacy combined with the civilization that produces it begins to change not a little bit, but everything. Or lots of things. And so what you encounter in the Axial Age, and why it all occurs so close together, historically speaking, is because you're getting the development of the technology of agriculture that spreads around slowly, but it does spread, and the trade networks required for bronze, and then most importantly for iron, because these are all Iron Age civilizations, by the way. Making bronze is tricky. Making real good steel is incredibly difficult. One, you have to have very high temperature furnaces. You've got to do cleaning technology of molten metal. You have to have the right mix of chemicals that you add in so that's workable. I mean, it is a system. It takes a lot of knowledge and work. And if you think bronze is good to have, Wow, iron is spectacular to have. Iron wins every single time. And so the magic of iron requires, again, greater level of sophistication, greater density of population, larger trade networks, advanced mining technology. And so Confucius, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Buddha, all of these thinkers are facing the same problems. We had a stable system. Most of them are backward looking, by the way. The golden age was then, behind us. We need to maintain the old structures, what's good about the past, in this new environment. How do we do that? How do you deal with foreigners? How do you deal with ideas that come in from the outside? How do you make sure that new ideas and new morals don't overthrow our old way of doing things? What do you do with the growing power of merchants? Again, generally speaking, the philosophers of the ancient world had no use for merchants at the exact time that merchants are taking over their economies. Right? The warrior elite is fading, well, it's gone, essentially, already. And it's been replaced by, well, people who understand how to do treaties and make trade, send ambassadors about. You know, that's the struggle. Again, the Spartans are the great example of someone just trying to hold out as long as possible against that tradition. Eventually, they just fail. I mean, they held a long time. But they did not want goods. I mean, they're famous for they didn't want trade goods. They did not want money in their system. Everybody lived communally. They had a perfectly oppressed slave class. But that system, which when we look at it, we go, wow, that's incredibly harsh, really is a model for pretty much how most of the ancient world was run. Again, 90% serfs and slaves. At least, I mean, probably more for most of the ancient world. And so you have to imagine, again, peasants don't matter, but you have to imagine you're a ruling elite. You're moneyed, you've got ties to the noble families, to the aristocracies, to the oligarchies. And all of a sudden, these foreign people with foreign ideas and money and different technologies show up. How do you deal with this? It just overthrows everything. We have our gods are correct. Remember, Socrates was put to death in part for promoting foreign gods. Historically, that's a new problem. The only way foreign gods were ever introduced into a culture is if your city just got conquered by somebody else's city. Everybody who wasn't killed just converted because, now Marduk is the god. Great. Okay, now Baal's the god. Excellent, right? You rolled through. Notice this is a totally different threat. No one's conquered us. No one invaded Athens at this moment. And yet here come the foreign gods. How did they get here? Letters, trade, merchants, travel. We went to Egypt and we thought, that seems interesting. We went to Persia. They've got some interesting gods. Let's bring those back. And so the notion that physical threats are not the biggest problem, although they're still prominent, but now we have intellectual threats. This is new again, because before you had your city-state, and either it stood on its own, everybody followed that who mattered because they were inside the walls. And if they were conquered, then that's it. The new people are in charge. This is a very easy, non-confusing, if incredibly oppressive system. Wow. Also think about this. Here you are. You're the son or daughter of an incredibly powerful noble family. And some mid-level craft person makes the ancient world equivalent of $10 million, trading God only knows what with people we've never even heard of. And they just bought the mansion next door. And they have vastly more money than we do. This is a threat. Not only does it make you feel bad, It's like, hey, we're in charge here. No, well, maybe. Unless we buy some votes and sort of, right, so this is a new rising power. And people said, look, that power does not matter. We don't need it. We don't care about that. It is the oligarchy. That's it. We're done. And then they would go to war. And they're like, ooh, we need some money to pay mercenaries. And the people are like, oh, you want to borrow some money to execute a war, do you? Well, thanks for coming on down. How about we marry a couple of your daughters? Wouldn't that be swell? And they're like, ooh, that would be great. Let's do that. And so all of a sudden you get this mix of the merchant princes. Again, if you read the ancient texts, they never talk about merchants. They just do not want to deal with them right up until the Axial Age, and then they say they're bad. There's lots of different versions of caste systems. It's not just in India. All over the world, in the ancient world, and merchants are always at the bottom. It's the worst thing you can be is a merchant. So they kept trying to impose this notion that merchant is terrible. At the same time, they're like, oh, merchants turn out to be invaluable. We can't get rid of them. We don't know what to do with them. We don't like them. We want to oppress them. We want them to go away. But we need them. Because we want tin. We want silk. We need to import wine. Those guys know how to make boats. Oh, boats are good. And those challenges do not go away. And so again, when you go through the Axial Age thinkers, this is one of the things they're struggling with. Where do you put merchants in the hierarchy of things? Even today, right? People always talk about bankers and always has that 2,400-year-old tinge of, we don't like bankers. Notice it carries over for thousands of years. This is how influential these people have been. That we still, something is wrong there, we know it. We can't ever quite figure it out. We never seem to be able to get rid of the banks, and yet we just, it's wrong. We don't know why it's wrong, but we know it's wrong for the same reason that Plato, Aristotle, Confucius, the Buddha, Zarathustra, everybody knew it was wrong, and they still know it's wrong because we don't like that change. It's a new power, a new threat, it's money. And we're suspicious, and we've been suspicious for, like I said, several thousand years, which is bizarre. It's truly bizarre in our culture because we live on money. Right? Let's not be confused about our culture. We are a financially denominated society at every moment. And yet we still are suspicious of bankers, which I think is both great and weird. Right? But it's that tinge, that dirtiness that attaches to money has stuck with us. And think of our struggles with literacy. Right? America has a great tradition of anti-intellectualism, but this tradition goes all the way back. Confucius was not really all that hep on lots of people getting an education. He wanted a few people to get the right kind of education. This tends to be the ancient world response to this. You don't want too many educated people. That's a bad idea. You don't want general literacy. That is a terrible idea. You want a few people, philosopher kings, scholastic elites, educated to the utility of ruling. Because what happens when you educate other people is you create trouble. You get problems. They knew it's perfectly obvious. So again, when you read these Axial Age philosophers, most of them, not all of them, but most of them have this similar outlook on this. They're like, just don't educate the people. Education is this kind of education for a very narrow group of people. Everybody else needs to just toe the line. Because it's better for everybody if we can all just agree. The problem they ran into, of course, immediately is the craftspeople, which is another thing that we're still trying to work out, is when you get cities and you start wanting to have navies, and you want to make iron, and you want to make villas and all those, you need people with skills and crafts and technology and capacities. And so they started saying, all right, okay, we'll let craftspeople exist. So you can have crafty education, but we don't want you to have philosophical education. Right? And so to me, and again, you get this, Confucius is all over the place, right? What people need to know how to do their jobs, and that's it. It makes them unhappy to know more than what is necessary for them to do their productive labor. So don't give it to them. Our current obsession with STEM, I always think, is simply this logic, again, 2,400 years later. We know we want people in science and technology. I'm not sure we know why, but we think it's good. And we know there's some educational component to that, although we don't know what it is. So we think, right, train people to program things for some reason, because that's good. But they don't need any other training. They don't need more education than that, because that would just confuse them. It has no utility value. Right? This is the notion, this is a craft education. The idea of, you're gaining a finite set of skills to do a very narrow job, and then you won't cause trouble. Well, the Axial Age philosophers come up with this idea because they're the first people who faced this problem. Before this, cities were so small, the problems they faced were so rudimentary, you didn't need a lot of craftspeople. A generalist could do basically everything. You needed a few people who know how to make weapons, but slowly it grows. By the time you want to make something like a trireme, you need a hell of a lot of highly skilled individuals. Oh, you want rope? Well, you can't go to Home Depot and buy rope, right? It's not, you've got to make it. Oh, how do you make it? Oh, well, the best rope is made with sisal from Egypt. Well, how the hell do we get sisal from Egypt? Well, we trade with them. Here we go, right? The whole problem. So, but you want to have triremes in the ancient world. You want to have trade ships. You want to do all of these things. And so all these problems rise up simultaneously. And again, that's what's important about the Axial Age, is that thinking still obsesses us. It still influences the way we look at the world. And then, and this is the general argument about the Axial Age, is all of these elements, the literacy and the money and the trade and the exposure to foreign ideas and the educated elites that start to rise up, as suspicious as everybody always is of educated elites, people start to think differently. A group of people rises up and they start going, if everybody has different gods everywhere you go, maybe this whole God thing is a bit dubious. Now, this is an incredibly disruptive and sort of odd breakthrough in the ancient world. Epicurus and some of the earlier pre-Socratic philosophers were right on the edge of just going, we traveled around a little bit and we're getting suspicious. Incredibly disruptive. The other thing that starts to happen is they start asking these meta questions. So it's one thing to say, what does our God think? It's another thing to say, well, let's compare all the gods and see what they all think. Aristotle famously collected a bunch of the constitutions from the city-states from all over the Hellenistic world to compare them. See, that is weird. Our laws are right, everybody else barbarians. But what you get is this consistent level of abstraction, this meta-thinking that goes, you know what, our law's functional, but let's look at all the possible laws and compare them in a big graph and see if there aren't some things that we could do better and some things we want to avoid to come up with the best possible set of laws. Because the whole concept there is you have to think, my laws might not be the best. And remember, up until about the Axial Age, if you were the ruler, you thought your laws were the best. That's the definition of a ruler. If you weren't the ruler, then the threat of saying, let's think about the laws, they just killed you. They were not asking a lot of questions. They weren't sending polls. They didn't get called with polls, right? What do you think of our ruler's recent decision to invade the Assyrians? No, they didn't they just invaded the Assyrians. If you didn't like it, they put a spear in you. But now you get this class that's not in charge, because if you're in charge, you don't want to ask these questions. But they aren't ignorant peasants who don't know how to ask these questions. They're literate, and they're sitting around. This is a dangerous combination, by the way. You don't want literate people sitting around because they think things like, I wonder if we have the best possible set of laws. And that sort of question, right? How many times have you heard? Again, this comes right down today. How many times have you heard since you were in grade school, American Constitution, greatest constitution ever? This is just an absurd assertion. I mean, it's a pretty good constitution, I think. But no, you've got to look, you've got to compare it to all the constitutions through history, or at least many representative constitutions. And go, here's what we do pretty well. That seems not so great. Here's something that could change. It's the only reasonable way to do this. We're not interested in that. Even 2,000 years later, we know that's a stupid idea. What you do is you say, no, ours is the best possible system. All other systems suck. But 2,400 years ago, Aristotle's doing this. He's doing this exact thing. Going, let's compare all the different constitutions. Confucius is going through all the old texts. He was a huge studier of ancient texts. I mean, if Confucius had done nothing but save all these ancient Chinese texts, he would be an important person in intellectual history. We think of the medieval guys wandering around and getting all the texts from the monasteries. Confucius was doing something like that, whatever that works out to be 2,000 years earlier. Or, 1,900 years earlier. Because of this question, well, what were they doing? What was the Duke doing back then? Let's get those ideas, get the best ones, and make them work again. But notice how, even though he claimed to be, Confucius, by the way, always claimed to be a conservative, this is a very radical idea. If you're the living Duke of wherever, you don't want some scholar saying, hey, we did some research in your archives and found out that you used to do this a totally different way, and that was a lot better. You're like, hey, Confucius, thanks for visiting. It's good to see you. Don't let the door knock you in the ass on the way out, right? I mean, and off they would shuffle Confucius. That sort of continuous failure that he had to get any traction is because he claimed to be a conservative, but in fact he was quite a dangerous radical. And if you're a ruler, you're not confused about this in any way. But it's in the Axial Age that you get this class of people who start doing this, who start asking these questions in systematic ways, and importantly, writing them down so that they can come down to us. And so you get this concept, just the idea, hey, we could compare constitutions. We could compare legal systems. We could compare governing systems. We could compare religious systems. Ideas of history, ideas of the origins of the world. Let's collect those. See, compare. Who's got the best one? What makes more sense? Right, this is completely unnerving. And this extended, by the way, even to something like mathematics, importantly. The difference between Greek and Persian and Egyptian mathematics, but particularly Greek mathematics as it came down to us, is the ancient Babylonians and the ancient Persians, coming from the Babylonian line, had worked out how to solve all kinds of very interesting and challenging problems. But they had little algorithms. Put the number here, put the number here, put the number here, and then out will come the number. So how big is this field? Put this, this, and this, and then the number you come out with, that's how big your field is. And they were like word problems. The Greeks seem to be the people who came up with the idea of, hey, let's solve that for every possible field that ever could be. This is a strange level of abstraction because there's no reason to do that. Let's imagine we have a field that's twice the size of the universe and is squashed on one end. How much grain would we need to plant that? That's a stupid question. But the Greeks could tell you. They're like, we can work that out. We know how to do this. We've got Diophantus, we got Euclid, we got Pythagoras, we got these guys who are doing these kinds of stupid questions. We don't know why. It's not functional. But it's that weird level of abstraction Now, I think some people take this argument too far and say, oh, then totally, human mind was transformed and all this. I'm not so convinced about that. I think our humans have been perfectly capable of doing this for a great period of time. But now you have an environment where, you have the leisure. You just need leisure. You need to be able to sit around a long time to think, imagine we have a field twice the size of the universe. See, you have to be eating regularly. You have to be clothed, you have to be relatively safe, and you have to be incredibly well educated to think something that daft. Right? I mean, you need those. And that's rare historically. And you also have to not care what the leader or the priests or the other people really think. Because they don't want you to think about that stuff. And it also is very helpful if you can get foreign ideas. If you can start lifting stuff from other smart people and other smart cultures. Which even today we're still dubious about this. Right? This whole notion of, you want a solution to a problem? Well, let's just go ask people all over the world. Somebody must have worked on this. How did they solve it in Africa? They must have some good ideas. No. We'll develop it here. Sort of intellectual isolationism still functions because we know those other people. I mean, we say they're equal, but we just know they're not that bright. The Greeks were hilarious about this because they were very big on the barbarians. Right? Anybody who didn't speak Greek was a barbarian in the Hellenistic world, except for the Egyptians and the Persians, which is to say everybody else they came in contact with practically, because they would go to Egypt occasionally, and people would say, Greeks would say, those Egyptians, and the Greeks that had been to Egypt would be like, probably don't want to say bad things about the Egyptians. They've done some pretty impressive work over there. And then, of course, the Persians kept conquering everything, and so that makes you impressive. So, they had to expand their minds and get around the fact that, hey, these other cultures are doing interesting and good things. But that is a challenge. This undermines all kinds of very central claims. And so the struggle of the Axial Age is the introduction of the struggle that we still face today. That's why it lasts. That's why it matters. That's why it's important. If we did not face the challenges that these people faced, their philosophy would not be sensible to us. It's why much medieval philosophy makes no sense to us. Because those religious debates that they were having don't resonate. These were brilliant people, great minds, but they were arguing about things that just have no application to us. It's like if you read a long argument about the best way to make a chariot wheel, we're like, meh, right? We don't care. I mean, you can read it and go, well, that has sort of a historical interest or something, but we just don't really care. But a long argument about what it means to be a citizen, see, it's still topical. That never seems to go away or hasn't gone away yet. Or money. What the hell do you do with money? Very topical. Right? Slaves, serfs, peasants, workers. How do you deal with that? Very topical. Meaning of life. Very topical. Notice these are the people who start talking about the meaning of life. You only ask questions about the meaning of life when A, you have free time. B, you have some choices. Slaves do not need to worry about the meaning of life. They know the meaning of life is try to live until tomorrow. Challenging enough. That's your problem. If you have some free time, some education, and some choice, then you go, wonder what the meaning of life is. Because you're asking, what should I do with my time? And the only way you can answer that question is some idea of what it's good to do with your time. And now, as soon as you ask that question, you're doomed. Right? You're just like, I don't know, chariot races, chase some women, build a statue, go to war, kill my neighbor. What should I do? Plant a garden. Swim the Bosporus. I don't know. Travel to Egypt. I could do anything. And then when we've been arguing, right, we just keep arguing about that until you get to Sartre. By the way, this is a great thing about Sartre, because Sartre says this is the human problem. The whole human problem is the fact that we've been arguing about this for 2,000 years because we don't know what to do. Existentialism. He just made the next meta move, which is to say the whole problem of the human condition is the human condition. Right? People were trying to solve it. He's like, no, you can't solve that. It's just insoluble. But Sartre is working on the exact same problem that Epicurus is 2,000 some years before. Because he's in the same position. I have some free time. Oh, look, Nazis. What should I do? It's a big problem. How do you live your life ethically when, hey, you've been invaded by a foreign power? See? In earlier times, before the Axial Age, you didn't have this problem because you didn't have enough free people to worry about it. And so the resonance of these philosophers, the reason they still matter, the reason we can still read them and go, ooh, that's interesting, or at least some people do, and it seems relevant, is because it is relevant, because the problems that were introduced lo these many years ago are the problems of people who live in cities, who have to deal with money, who have to deal with foreign ideas, who have some leisure time, who have some resources, and we're trying to figure out how the hell do we live in this world. We don't rule, we're not in charge, but we're not slaves and serfs and peasants. And so this philosophy that started trying to address those problems of those people, which 2,400 years ago, there's about 12 people like this, by the way. 2,000 years later, now there's about 5 to 6 billion in the world. We still have 1 billion or a little more people who are in such dire poverty that essentially they have not entered this set of philosophical problems. Hopefully we can give them existentialism, right? That's the gift of wealth. Here, have some food and have some psychological and fascinating philosophical conundrums. Congratulations, right? This is what you get. It's a package deal. And so this is what we've been talking about, why these philosophers matter that I've talked about for the preceding year. But I want to now look at where we're going to go for next year, because next year I've lost my mind. And what I want to do is look at what I call the transvaluation of all values, stealing from Nietzsche, of course, always good to do that. Because I would argue that we're living through the equivalent of another axial age. We have no idea how to respond to the world in which we live, because while we still have many of the problems that the philosophers of the axial age were discussing and presented to us, we have a vast array of new problems that have completely and totally befuddled us. Our religions, our cultures, our constitutions, our legal systems, our social norms, our language, basically our philosophical systems, don't know how to address them. This is my central argument for next year. And so, yeah, it's just that easy. Should be no problem. And so how we need to reshape our thinkings and our minds and our actions to do essentially what the philosophers began doing 2,000 plus years ago. Faced with all these new opportunities, faced with all these new problems, faced with these new systems and structures and ways of thinking and technological innovations. How do you respond when certain things just don't work the same way anymore? And I'll just give you one example that goes back to the Axial Age. When you start meeting foreign peoples, you have a couple of choices. The first choice usually is kill them. If you decide not to kill them, then you have to figure out how to live with them. So you can either exclude them or you can start mixing with them. And when you start mixing with them, well, then you come up with all these crazy marriage laws. Marriage laws are always fun. Anthropologists love to look at all the different rules we've come up with for ways to marry. But in theory, the marriage customs that we have been inherited from cultures that go back way before the Axial Age. Probably running to pre-agrarian age in some times. So we have customs that were developed over 10,000 years ago that still have this incredible influence on a society 10,000 years later. Now, if nothing fundamental has changed in your society in the intervening 10,000 years, your custom is probably just fine. It seems like things have changed. That's my theory. And it means, not irrationally, that institutions like marriage struggle. And we have all these debates now about marriage in all kinds of different ways. And in fact, we've changed our marriage culture dramatically without saying that we've changed it. We keep saying we're doing the same thing and we don't do the same thing at all, which is a classic sign that your intellectual and cultural norms are not keeping up with what's actually going on. And so that sort of ancient 10,000-year-old custom is having a rough time of it, because the world in which that custom was developed is long, long, long gone. And so trying to understand how ancient institutions, ancient ideas translate into a new world with new forces, new concepts, new cultures, it's virtually hard. It's really hard, basically. It's virtually impossible. In fact, it's a stupid idea for a lecture series. Let's just say that right up front. Let's just be clear on that. And yet, I think it's worth a shot for the same reason that the people were giving it a shot a couple of thousand years ago. We don't think of them as facing technological innovation, but they were. I mean, when someone develops a new kind of pot, those urns, those beautiful urns that they shipped everything in. Man, I wish Amazon would ship things in Grecian urns. Wouldn't that be great? Because then I would really like to get stuff from Amazon. I would just throw out what was ever inside and just keep those beautiful urns, right? No, we get ugly boxes. Urns. Let's push for urns. But that development of a new urn does a couple of things. Like people go, oh, that's beautiful, we want it. 2, it's very efficient at carrying this, so we need to copy that. And 3, it means that your potters, your people who make this, they have to change. And so what we call, technology advancing, it was already happening. The second a ship lands with a superior product, all of your craftspeople and your traders go, ooh, problem. Got to solve that. Because it's going to bankrupt us if we just keep buying all that stuff. The classic example here is the Opium Wars. If even people know the Opium War history, is England had nothing that China wanted, and China had everything that England wanted. So England was sending basically all of its gold and silver to China. And so England was like, we gotta find something to sell the Chinese. And they came up with opium, which was a very friendly solution. So they said, if we can get a lot of Chinese people addicted to opium, that would be great because we run India. So that's cool. And the Chinese were like, no, we don't think you should be allowed to sell your drugs in our country. So they had a war. And the end of the war was, whoa, no, it'd be lovely if you sold us your drugs. And then England got their gold back. Right? So there was, this, and that's not 2,000 years ago. This is recent history. That the fact that England couldn't come up with something to compete with the goods from China forced them to go to war with China. And this was happening in the ancient world just over and over again. Where somebody developed something that's better, new, you either outlaw it, that was always popular. Oh, no, nobody can buy that. But then that tended not to work. Smuggling has been popular for a long, long time. And so then you go, oh, we have to do something to compete. We either have to conquer those people, we have to force them to integrate with our society, or we need to just copy it. Make something like it that people here will consume, and this will balance things out again. So we think of our time, we are living in a time of unprecedented technological development, but the response started 2,400 years ago. The necessity of reshaping your thinking to continuous pressure from outside technologies, outside markets, outside peoples, outside ideas. That's what's new about the Axial Age. Before then, you could live moderately isolated. You could have a small controlled space, or even a large controlled space, where very few people had access to any resources, and so they just told everybody else what to do. 99% slaves, 1% ruling, 5% ruling. But I don't know exactly what the percentage reaches, but at some point when 7 or 8 or 9% of your population is not working in the fields and is literate and skilled and has some capacity and some free time, you get problems. And history is perfectly clear. If you try to control those problems by isolating your country, you fail. You either fail today, or you fail tomorrow, or you fail in 75 years. But basically, eventually, someone is going to have worked out something that destroys your way of life. And so this process that feels so inevitable, feels so modern, feels this constant pressure of new ideas, new concepts, new goods, new technologies, started there. Or at least started there and influenced the thinkers who had the capacity to write it down and have it come to us. And so taking those concepts, those challenges, and then writing them for next year's lecture into today is sort of my concept. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Axial Age, and thank you very much for attending this year.